Okay, everybody, welcome to tonight's Long Island Band of Brothers. Our special guest tonight is Dr. Matt McCoy. For you who don't know him, he's one of the foundation people for Chiroputers. Full disclosure, I'm one of their insured, so I just want to put that out. He's basically brought back all of the also the scientific journals. He was involved with JBSR years ago, and he has. If you're not subscribing to the journals, that's we missed out on a lot of stuff. But something I found out about Matt McCoy just recently when I was listening to some of his other interviews, he's a college pointer. I couldn't believe it. I grew up
Originally
in
Jackson
Bayside.
Heights, though.
College Point, man. It's like 5 miles from Bayside. So anyway, Matt, welcome to the Band of Brothers. This floor is yours, buddy.
Thanks, Johnny. If I want to share my screen, I'm good to go with that.
Hold on one second. I just got to be ready to do that.
So while he's doing that, I'll just kind of go ahead and wade into it. A couple of things in terms of Johnny's introduction. I want to be really clear on something tonight. I am talking to you as Matthew McCoy, a chiropractor, nothing else. So I'm not representing anybody. I'm not speaking for anybody. I'm not, you know, it's all me. So if I say something that offends somebody or pisses somebody off, which is pretty much guaranteed whenever I'm talking, don't complain to Tony, complain to me.
Matt, you can share your screen now. I got it set up.
Let me make sure it's going to work. All right. You guys can see that screen?
Yeah. Yep.
Let me see if this works. All right, you guys can see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. So what I'm going to talk about is stewardship. And, looking at the folks that are on this call, you guys have all been in this profession a long time. So I'm gonna talk with that in mind, that really nothing I tell you should be news to you. And if it is, then I don't know what to tell you, but people have to start paying attention to what's going on in our profession. When I was looking up, when Johnny scheduled me for this, I've been in chiropractic a long time. I grew up in chiropractic since I was 6 or 7 years old. Sarasoli was my first chiropractor. And I got licensed a little over 30 years ago. So I've been a chiropractor a long time. I grew up around straight chiropractic. I grew up around the DE movement. And I say movement specifically and stress that word because that's what it was. There was a movement in chiropractic when I got involved in it. And that movement seemed to continue, during the time I was in school at Life in the mid to late 80s. But I don't see much of a movement in chiropractic anymore. And I think that all became apparent to us during COVID and all the nonsense that went on and the lack of leadership within chiropractic during COVID. Even to this day, I mean, you look around at what's happening with Doge and you look around what's happening with Trump and all of the accountability that's taking place now and going to hopefully continue to take place. Unfortunately, that accountability hasn't hit the chiropractic profession. None of these people that shut you down, shut us down, none of these people in the chiropractic profession that force you to wear a mask, that force you to clean your hands 1,000,000 times a day and do all this unscientific stuff and did it via illegal mandates. None of those people have been held accountable. And that's a tragedy, really, when you think about it. In fact, many of those people were elevated to greater positions of leadership in the profession, which is quite a shame. So, when I was preparing for this and looking at this, I was looking up Band of Brothers. I've been around chiropractic a while. I've spoken at Band of Brothers meetings around the country over the years. And everything that I could find, except for a few things, all sort of point to this concept of Band of Brothers having to do with the military, having to do with, special operations and things of that nature. Even where it talks about religious connotations to Band of Brothers, it's still about an army. In that sense, it's about an army fighting against the devil. So I want you to know, as I'm talking tonight, that's the spirit from which I'm coming from. Okay. At this point, I consider myself, an elder in the profession. And listen, some of you guys are probably older than me. So you got me beat on that, but I am at a point in my personal and professional career that I'm tired. I'm sick and tired of what the profession has done and is doing to its youth. I told you before, I've had a license for about a little
Hold
over
on a
30
second,
years.
Matt. Hold on a second. Whoever's got their background, please mute yourself.
I've had a license for a little over 30 years. For 20 of those years, I taught at a chiropractic institution. And I got the real inside scoop on how the sausage is made. For the past 8 years, I've been sitting on a board of trustees of a chiropractic college, and got an even deeper insight into what goes on in terms of the machinations of our profession. And, one of the things that I watched heavily over the past 6 months, and it's really been going on heavily over the past couple of years, that many of you probably aren't even aware of, are that literally thousands of chiropractic graduates, people who graduated from chiropractic college, or people that didn't graduate but walked away halfway, with a bunch of student loan debt, all filed what's called borrower's defense claims to try to get their student loans forgiven. We're talking about thousands of chiropractors, okay? Some of them that I know personally, some of them that you all probably know personally, but you just don't know that they are involved in this. And I had an inside scoop on this because I had former students of mine telling me about it. And I had people allowing me to get into these social media groups, these private groups where all these discussions were taking place and where they were sharing their evidence. And in order to assert borrower's defense, you have to show evidence of fraud and misrepresentation by the institution. And some of the stuff that they have, the evidence they have, is really sickening. That this misrepresentation was perpetrated on these young people. So I want you to understand where I'm coming from with all this stuff that I talk about and with the focus of my life at this point. I am done with people abusing the young people in our profession. I'm done with it. I'm not putting up with it anymore, and it needs to come to an end. And that's pretty much where I stand on that. So this talk is about stewardship. This is probably the 50th iteration of this talk. I began giving this talk to my senior level students at Life many years ago. I continue to do this talk from time to time where this topic comes up or where I'm asked to talk about stuff like this. And so this is the latest iteration of it, just so everybody kind of knows. So let's get into it. Can you guys still see the slides?
Yes, sir.
All right, let me just move this out of the way here. So
Matt, we could see your whole PowerPoint screen if you just put it on just to,
Slideshow.
you want to be like right here.
No,
That'll open up.
I'm fine. I don't care if everybody can see
Okay.
the screen or not.
All right.
So first of all, let's define something here. Kind of really what I was just talking about. Stewardship is a noun, stewardship, plural noun, stewardship's the job of supervising or taking care of something such as an organization, a profession, or property. So in this case, we're talking about the chiropractic profession. And this talk is titled The Top 10 Things You Can Do to Save the Profession. Now, obviously, you've got to believe that the profession needs saving, right, in order to buy into this. I'm not going to spend much time at all trying to convince this group that the profession needs saving. I would bet, or I would assume, that you all wouldn't be getting together at 8:30 on a Monday night as a band of brothers, understanding what I think that term means, if you didn't know that the profession needed saving. So I'm going to operate from the assumption that you do know it needs saving. Jim Rohn, one of my favorite all-time motivational speakers and mentor, says all values must be fought for and vigorously defended. It never ends, is the point. It never ends. People are always going to try to destroy your values. And you constantly have to be on guard for it. It's not something that you do once or twice and then everything is hunky-dory and you move on. I find this to be a challenge with chiropractors who don't want to get involved in politics. And it's interesting that it's usually the philosophically oriented chiropractors that don't want to get involved in politics. And little do they know that politics is a branch of philosophy. So we have all our straight chiropractors who want to love, serve, give, and all that sort of stuff. But they don't want to fight. They don't want to get dirty. Their politics is nasty. It's negative. I don't have room in my heart for that. I have, all this nonsense. I'm sorry, but, politics is a branch of philosophy and we have to fight for these values. I said I grew up around DE and the DE movement. I was brought up listening to Sid Williams on cassette tapes, driving around with my older brother who was the first chiropractor in our family. And, my favorite part about DE was always Sid talking about politics, talking about the battles, talking about the fights, talking about the wins, talking about the losses. I'll never forget some of those talks. So again, just understand where I'm coming from in terms of fighting for our values and that it's a never-ending process. The first thing I tell anybody, especially young people, is before you're going to help anybody else, you got to get your own shit together, right? You got to get your own house in order. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that because I assume that at this point, most of you guys, have your act together. Your elders in the profession, your leaders in the profession. So we don't need to really get into the nitty gritty on that stuff. One of the other things I generally talk about to the kids is something Bob Hoffman taught me when I went to work for him for my first year out of school in Oyster Bay. He told me, Matt, the best way to help poor people is to not be one of them. I'll never forget it for as long as I live that he told me that. Because, I had some baggage when it came to money growing up. My parents grew up during the Great Depression, so I was raised by parents who, came from a position, a sense of lack, and taught us that money was evil. And that the only way you get money is you steal it or you take it from other people. So I had a lot of crap to overcome in order to deal with that stuff in my younger days. But, generally speaking, I stress to people that, to students, to young students getting out of school that want to get involved and want to help, that the first thing that they got to do is get their own personal life in order. And the next thing they have to do is they got to make money. because money makes the world go round. And if you are poor as a chiropractor, you're not going to be able to, A, have time to help the profession, and B, to give money to the causes that need your money in order to help the profession. So I usually go into a whole thing about this and how to do this. And this is all stuff I learned at DE, so it's no mystery. It probably is to them, but probably not to you guys. So we won't spend time on that. The third thing you can do to help save the profession is to investigate. It's a moral crime to support your own destruction. I feel extremely strongly about this issue. There's a lot of money that changes hands in chiropractic. I was just doing some research today to try and figure out how much money passes through the chiropractic profession every year. I used a bunch of AI tools to try to figure it out. And in a kind of scary way, they had trouble figuring it out. You know, it's easier to find out how much money is going through USAID than it is find out what's going through the chiropractic profession. But what I did was come up with was about $20 billion a year that passes through the chiropractic profession in one way, shape, or form. So who's getting that money? Where's that money being spent? What's it being spent on? Who's giving them that money? Right. So this goes from everything from where what EHR company you support, to which malpractice company you support, to which table manufacturer you support, to, all this stuff, there's a popular EHR system in chiropractic that everybody is using, but people don't seem to realize that they were part and parcel to the COVID thing and had vaccination tracking in their software. But, when you point that out, they just get mad at you. So it's a moral crime to support your own destruction. So it's important for us as chiropractors to know where our money is going. If you're giving money to different causes that are seeking to destroy you or stop what you're doing, stop what you love, or destroy your values, then you're supporting your own destruction, plain and simple. This can get very difficult, because how far down should you go? How far down should you track, where all these connections are in terms of these companies and businesses that you're spending money on, You may think that the company you're spending money on is great and they support chiropractic, but who are they giving money to? So this takes a lot of effort and time. And again, it's one of those things that I find that people just aren't necessarily willing to spend their time, to uncover this. Investigate, again, it's a moral crime to support your own destruction. So we have in the profession a controlling cartel that operates in the profession. This, I'm sure, isn't news to anybody on this call. This cartel essentially uses student loan money and funnels that student loan money through its affiliated organizations in one way, shape, or form or the other. And this is important really to understand, because this is starting to get to the heart of our young people in the profession, okay? And I'll give you an example of some of the kind of nonsense that goes on in this profession with this cartel. So for many years, some of you may know, the CCE had a thing called the alternative admissions track. This alternative admissions track came about because many years ago, the CCE wanted to raise admission standards to get into chiropractic college. And it freaked out a lot of the schools. And there was a great deal of debate amongst the schools and the CCE about this and how they were going to handle it. And so finally a compromise was struck. And that compromise allowed the CCE to raise their standards, but at the same time, it allowed schools to create what was called an alternative admissions track. Essentially meaning what this meant and what it actually played out to be was that schools could let in pretty much anybody they wanted, regardless of their educational background. And I'll give you some examples. For example, they did away with the requirement for organic chemistry, for general chemistry, for physics. So you could, if you had a music degree, but you had no science background, you could still get into chiropractic college. And they ran this alternative admissions track for an extended period of time. I want to say, don't quote me on this, but about a decade or so. Now, this alternative admissions track was tied to a policy, a CCE policy called Policy 56, okay? Policy 56 requires chiropractic schools to report their graduation rates and to report their national board scores, okay? These students that were let in under the alternative admissions track, I want you to imagine, and you know, let me backtrack a second. This data then is reported on the school's websites, okay? So you could do a thumbnail sketch if you got that data, if you went to all the chiropractic college websites during the time that the alternative admissions track was in place, and you looked at the graduation rates of the various cohorts, you could kind of figure out when and where these students were dropping out of school or getting kicked out of school because they couldn't cut it, okay? Now, I can tell you, because of my experience inside the educational system, that most of the students that drop out of chiropractic college or get kicked out of chiropractic college, it happens about fifth quarter. So if you do the math on how much debt that is by fifth quarter, it's about 60 grand, okay? So we had this cohort of students, and still do, because I'll explain in a second. The alternative admissions track went away, but the ability for schools to just take in whoever they wanted has not gone away. The only thing that's gone away is the CCE has decided that the schools no longer have to track those cohorts as a separate line item to show that they were progressing through the program correctly. I maintain that the reason they did away with that requirement is because the data is so damning in terms of millions and millions of dollars of student loan money, where students paid this money to schools, okay, because of a CC requirement and didn't make it out. So they were kicked out of school or dropped out of school with $60,000 worth of debt, no license. So they essentially bought a car that they can't drive, but they got to pay that car off. And if you do the numbers times, 16 educational institutions over 10 years, just a back of the napkin calculations, you're going to come up with an insane, sickly amount of money. Okay. And keep in mind, these are all human beings that are out there. These are all human beings that bought into the vision of chiropractic enough to apply, enough to get into chiropractic school, enough to try to make it through 4, 5, 6 quarters, only to fail out or get kicked out, but still have that debt. Okay. And who knows how their lives, are affected as a result of that. So this is just one example, of what I'm talking about with this. If we talk about, in terms of what can be done with this issue, because this issue of the cartel extends obviously into clinical practice. The cartel has historically pushed an expansion of scope throughout the profession, expansion of scope, adding drugs to chiropractic practice or trying to add drugs to the practice of chiropractic, minimizing the concept of vertebral subluxation, I should say marginalizing the concept of subluxation, supporting research that denigrates the practice of chiropractic in a subluxation model, supporting researchers that publish this kind of nonsense. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Simon Senzon. The Foundation for Vertebral Subluxation gave him a full scholarship to the Southern Cross University for him to get his PhD. His PhD was on lies and deception in the chiropractic research. And Simon scoured the scientific literature. His review of the literature on this topic, on the lies that have been put into the literature deliberately, on purpose, by very specific people over the past 40 years, okay? In order for him to uncover this and map it, he actually had to develop a new system of analysis, which he got all kinds of accolades for, besides the work he did to expose these chiropractors. Really, the bigger piece for the people in the academic community was the methods he used in order to do this, which are going to go down in history. So Simon was able to map the literature, the chiropractic literature, and actually pinpoint, I think he came up with 19 key people who deliberately peppered the scientific literature, the peer-reviewed literature, with lies about subluxation-centered chiropractic. And then they proceeded to then quote themselves in future research papers, and then other people quoted them, and so forth and so on. So we get to the year 2025, and we have, generation or more of chiropractors who have been taught outright lies about what subluxation is and the whole basis for a subluxation model. So, these are the kinds of things that can be done, certainly to root these people out and to get to the bottom of this stuff. For many, many years, I harped on this last piece here, the research piece, relative to, saving the profession. And I sometimes hesitate to say this now because I don't want people to get complacent in terms of research, because, research is not static, right? I mean, we're dealing with this now with idiots in the mass media and so forth. The science is settled, that kind of bullshit. Well, science is never settled. Research is never settled. It's an ongoing process. You don't get to a point where you don't need any more research. That's as true in chiropractic as it is anywhere else. However, I can say, and I will say, without any hesitancy whatsoever, that I would put my hand on a Bible in front of a jury, raise my hand, and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I could support, through research, through an evidence-based, evidence-informed model, the management of vertebral subluxation in a vitalistic salutogenic model. There's no question about that. We have plenty of research to plant that flag. Whether or not the deniers in chiropractic accept it or not is a whole other issue. That is a political issue, okay? So we can solve our problems, we can solve some of our problems through research, but that's not really the issue. We can solve some of our problems through marketing. The problem with our profession is we listen to, chiropractors who had really big practices and believe that they know how to market the profession to the masses. And just because you can, one spine at a time, convince people to come into a chiropractic office does not mean you have the skill, knowledge, and so forth to get the masses to move in our direction. And part of the challenge with that is, the marketing piece of this is, we do not have cultural authority. So the methods that are used, say, for example, in public health communications, to get people to do something positive about their health when you identify a problem, those things that work in public health and in allopathic medicine do not work in chiropractic because we don't have cultural authority. So if public health, Anthony Fauci comes out and says, there's a new virus, it's going to kill everybody, so everybody's got to get injected with an experimental protein. Well, we saw what happened. 70% of the population of the planet Earth lined up willingly and took that experimental vaccine. And we have data in certain states that shows up to 50% of the chiropractors in those states where there's data did the same thing. So it gives you some sense of, where the profession's head is at when it comes to this stuff, okay? So they were able to do this. They were able to convince 70% of the worldwide population to inject themselves with experimental protein because they have cultural authority. Okay, our profession doesn't enjoy that. So we need a whole totally different model of marketing in order to get the masses to move in our direction. And that's why the needle hasn't moved. That's why we're still seeing 10% or less of the profession, even after all these years that we've been in it. So the real change at this point, after so many years of looking at this and fighting this issue, is the political piece, okay? And that's what I'm focusing on here with you guys tonight. We have a major political problem in chiropractic, okay? Our faction, the faction, when I say our faction, I mean the faction of chiropractic that focuses on location analysis and correction of vertebral subluxation, okay? Because it in and of itself is a detriment to the fullest expression of life. That faction of the profession is becoming increasingly small, okay? The data shows, if you look in the literature, the data shows that it's about 20 to 25% of the profession, okay? That's not to say that other people in the profession don't value subluxation, but that isn't their focus, or they're doing that, plus they're doing a million other things, okay? But the faction of the profession that is focused only on location analysis and correction of subluxation, very, very small, okay? And we have this entire infrastructure of the chiropractic cartel that doesn't see things that way, okay? If you haven't read the standards for chiropractic accreditation from the CCE, you should pull it out and read it. The schools are mandated, okay, to train chiropractors to be primary healthcare providers, not pool of entry. There's a difference, okay? They're supposed to be trained to be primary healthcare providers, okay? Well, who wants to be a primary healthcare provider? Nobody. Nobody wants to be a primary healthcare provider because primary healthcare providers have the most responsibility in healthcare and they get paid the least. So who in their right mind would want to be one? Along comes the chiropractors, right? Oh, me, pick me. I have no self-esteem. I'll be a primary healthcare provider, right? Meanwhile, they have no idea what that really means, okay? You read those competencies and the standards, and you read those meta competencies, there's 10 of them, okay? And then you ask yourself if you do those things every day with your patients. I challenge you to read those meta competencies and then tell me that you do all those things on every visit with all your patients. You're not going to convince me, but you could try, okay? Because those standards train primary healthcare providers, not chiropractors, okay? So we have a political problem in chiropractic. And we have this political problem because the people who control, the organizations that control chiropractic education, licensing, testing, and practice, okay, have a monopoly on that, okay? The CCE enjoys a state-mandated monopoly. The National Board of Chiropractic Examiners enjoys a state-mandated monopoly. And the FCLB enjoys this monopoly because the state boards have chosen to engage with the FCLB. The FCLB is an interesting animal because the FCLB is a private corporation, just like National Board and just like CCE, private corporations, okay? FCLB is a private corporation, okay? It's not a governmental organization, okay? Yet, state boards are members of the FCLB, okay? Make sure you're following me on this. State boards are members of a private corporation. So regulatory boards, state regulatory boards, pay dues using tax dollars and become members of a private corporation that seeks to regulate you and tell you what you can and can't do in practice, okay? And they have all kinds of new things coming your way in case, you know, you were hoping the FCLB had more plans on how to regulate chiropractic. And the FCLB, so they get their money from state boards that sign up for memberships. And the people who sit on those state boards use taxpayer dollars to send those people that sit on state boards to their meetings, okay? So we have the use of state tax dollars, state funds, and state resources going towards the benefit of a private corporation that regulates chiropractic. In addition to that funding, the FCLB gets 80% of its funding from the National Board of Chiropractic Examiners. The National Board of Chiropractic Examiners obviously gets their money from student loan money, okay? So we have this, you know, shuttling of student loan money through these organizations, okay? Let's see what I'm missing here. I'll come back to that. So in terms of what can be done about this, first and foremost, or the top two here, remove CC only language from state statutes, remove National Board of Chiropractic language from state statutes. And just going back for a second, this website, chiropracticcartel.com, you can go on there and you can look at what these resolutions call for. I'm going to stress very importantly that these resolutions and our coalition is not asking and not calling for these organizations to go out of business. Nobody is saying the CC's got to shut down, the MBC's got to shut down, the FCLB's got to shut down. It's America. It's the land of freedom and opportunity. They want to do business in the United States of America, God bless them. But they shouldn't have a monopoly because that's un-American. And it's unethical besides that. So if the people who run the cartel really cared, right, about the profession and about the young people in this profession, they'd at least say, well, let's help support the removal of this exclusionary language in state statutes. Let's not at least not be against that, right? Let's support that effort to have those things removed. But you don't see any of them clamoring to do that, do you? Which I find very interesting. So there is a movement to do this, and the website spells out very clearly what those resolutions are. All this coalition is asking for is freedom in chiropractic education, licensing, and practice. The freedom for other accrediting agencies to begin to do business in the chiropractic profession, the freedom for chiropractic schools to have the autonomy to actually teach chiropractic, right? There's 4,700 hours taught in chiropractic school. And, you know, listen, any of you that are paying attention to young people coming out of school, they can't find their ass with both hands, okay? So something's happening and something's not happening in those schools that students are graduating and they don't know what a subluxation is or how to find one or how to correct one, okay? Part of the problem is that they're spending the bulk of that 4,700 hours pushing on heads and lifting legs so they can pass some Part 4 exam, which is totally unnecessary. Every single school in this country certifies the competency of its graduates before they walk across that stage. In fact, I mean, this just pisses me off because it's so insulting to the chiropractic colleges. It's so insulting to every single faculty member that teaches at a chiropractic college. That these students, you know, if you've ever been to a graduation besides your own, and if you haven't, go to one soon, right? You'll see that the dean of the College of Chiropractic, or whatever that program is, makes an announcement to the board of trustees that's sitting there, the faculty that's sitting there, the parents and loved ones of the people sitting there, and the graduates that are sitting there. They make an announcement about that 4,700 hours, and they testify in public that those people that are about to walk across the stage have been deemed to be competent by the faculty, okay? And then they walk across the stage, they get their diploma, and who's standing on the other side? The National Board of Chiropractic Examiners that says, no, 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 no. You're not competent until we say you're competent, and you're not competent until you take our exam and pay us our fees. It's insane. Nobody can justify this. I don't care who you are, what you have to say. I've heard every argument that could possibly be, okay? It takes away the autonomy of the schools. And because of that, and because of those standards, the schools are not free to express their autonomy. They can't teach chiropractic. They have to teach primary health care to people. And I think you all know there's already a profession that does that. But there's only one profession that exists to teach people how to find, analyze, and correct vertebral subluxations. Sadly, the schools aren't allowed to do that, okay? Let me go back to that list. So this is why I'm stressing removing CC only language, removing national board mandates, national board language, okay? And especially in this case, part 4. The National Board is about to implement one of the biggest changes in their testing scheme since the beginning of the boards. Okay, beginning in 2026, they are centralizing the Part 4 exam. And I want you to really wrap your head around this for a second, okay? What this means. It means that those exams are no longer being given at the schools around the country. So everybody, every student, not just in the United States, every student anywhere in the world that wants to practice in the United States has to get to Greeley, Colorado, to the Mecca of chiropractic, right, to the National Board headquarters, and take Part 4 there in order to get licensed. So I want you to imagine something. Think about the average student at Sherman College of Chiropractic now, right? They got into Sherman College, they're doing their work, they're going through the program, they're paying their tuition, they graduate, right? But wait a second, in the back of their mind, they're not getting their diploma or their license from Sherman. They're getting it from the National Board. In fact, every single person that gets licensed in the United States beginning in 2026 will get the ability to practice not from the school they graduated from, but from the National Board of Chiropractic Examiners. This is an incredible, it's a genius move on their part, but it's a power grab for control of the chiropractic profession. Period. End of story. On top of that, the National Board just announced that they're instituting a voluntary entrance exam to chiropractic colleges, right? Now, if you've been around chiropractic as long as I have, every single one of you knows that every exam the National Board ever started was voluntary until it wasn't anymore, right? So this is just, you know, another in a long line of exams that they are churning out, okay? So those mandates, regulatory boards, okay? The interesting thing when you start to connect the dots, and it's getting easier and easier to do this stuff, by the way, with artificial intelligence, okay? If you can imagine that for a second with me, that the people who sit on state boards, okay, also sit on national boards, also sit on the FCLB, and these people rotate around, right? They jump from one board to the other, okay, as they rise up through the cartel's chain of leadership. Okay, so there's a lot of incestuous relationships that develop here. On top of all of that, beyond these private corporations who have state mandated monopolies, okay, we have this group called the Chiropractic Summit Group. The Chiropractic Summit Group is a secret organization within chiropractic, okay? You cannot have a seat at their table unless they let you in. You have to apply for membership. You have to pay for membership. And you have to sign something called the St. Louis Principles. And I know what the St. Louis Principles are because I was in the room when previous iterations of the Chiropractic Summit began. When I was involved, myself, Dr. Kent, Patrick Tempo, and Terry Rumberg, we were involved in it when it was called the Chiropractic Leadership Forum. And the Chiropractic Leadership Forum was the group that developed the St. Louis Principles. And the most significant thing about the St. Louis Principles are what I call the Fight Club rules, because you aren't allowed to talk about what goes on at the Chiropractic Summit. In fact, that's why the Chiropractic Leadership Forum fell apart back in the day over the issue of chiropractors in the VA. Those of you that were following this issue way back in the day when chiropractors were just getting into the VA might recall that our faction wanted chiropractic to get into the VA as portal of entry so that we didn't need referral. Well, within this previous iteration of the Chiropractic Summit, the Chiropractic Leadership Forum, the cartel made a deal, went behind the ICA's back, went behind the WCA's back, and sort of the FSCO at the time went behind their back, and they struck a deal for VA with referral. And Terry Ronberg ended up publishing a whole series of stories about it, outing them, specifically the ACA, for doing this. And that's what really disbanded the Chiropractic Leadership Forum, because he violated the St. Louis Principles by talking about Fight Club and publishing what they did. So if the cartel wants to stab somebody in the back, stab the profession in the back, you're not allowed to talk about it, basically. So we have this whole other secretive group, is my point, that's operating, and that has not only and National Board, the president of the National Board is the chair of the Chiropractic Summit Group. I just got confirmation from Craig Little at the CCE that the CCE is a member of the Chiropractic Summit Group, but he made a point to say they're a non-dues paying member and they're just there to share information. The problem is, if you got the FCLB in that group, you got the CCE in that group, and you got the FCLB in that group, along with a bunch of other private for-profit corporations, the F4CP, and all these other groups that are part of it. But you're not part of that, then what happens to you? Like, what happens to Sherman College if there are other colleges sitting in that room gaining that information from, the CCE or the National Board, but we're not allowed to have a seat at the table, right? This is why, if any of you followed the Keita Vanderpool case where she sued the FCLB, she sued them for racial discrimination. I maintain that she made a mistake suing them for racial discrimination. She should have sued them for the real reasons that they wouldn't let her have a seat at the table at the Chiropractic Summit. And that's because she just wasn't a good old boy. And she wasn't going to do the things the way the cartel wanted her to do things. So they couldn't keep her in her place, so they wouldn't let her have that seat at the table. It's an interesting story. I followed that trial through every day of the trial. And one of the things that they made public were the juror questions. Every single day, I mean, they asked a few questions about other stuff, but every single day, that jury wanted to know more about the Chiropractic Summit and why she wasn't allowed to have a seat at the table and why she was kicked out of her position at the FCLB because she wanted a seat at the Chiropractic Summit's table, right? They weren't asking questions about all the other stuff. And because the parameters were so narrow in terms of what they were able to, render their judgment on, they found that there was no racial discrimination. And like I said, I maintain our lawyers made a big mistake in terms of how they structured that case. So regulatory boards. I encourage people very strongly to get a seat on their regulatory board, their state chiropractic board. And this is chiropractors don't want to get involved in trade associations and serving on, like state associations and state societies. they really don't want to serve on state regulatory board, but that's where they're most needed. We need our kind sitting on these state regulatory boards. And we need them like yesterday, you know. We've been given a gift. I don't know if you all don't know this or not, but we've been given a gift, our profession, in the likes of Donald Trump, and in terms of what he is doing with the federal government. I think you all know that as far as Donald Trump and Elon Musk is concerned, there is no longer a Department of Education, right? I mean, they've shut it down. I mean, I think they're going to have they have a lot more to do to unravel that, but effectively they're shutting down the United States Department of Education. Here's the key piece of that for us as a profession. That does not remove the problem of the CCE only language, okay? Because that language is in state statutes, rules, and regulations, okay? It will weaken the CCE's argument when the United States Department of Education goes away, because they won't be recognized anymore, right? Remember, they're the only accrediting agency recognized by the United States Department of Education. There is another accrediting agency, I'll talk about that in a second, that is seeking recognition with the Department of Education, but that's not going to be necessary in a short period of time. So it's going to weaken the CCE, but it's not going to get rid of that issue, because again, it's a state by state issue. It will really weaken this issue in those states where the language actually mentions recognition by the Department of Education. Those are going to be the weakest states and the easiest states to sort of overturn this. But there's other language that's used in various states around the country that's going to have to be addressed. Okay. Regulatory board. So getting on your regulatory board, portal of entry. I kind of mentioned this already, but I want to stress it just in case that flew by you over your head. Right? It's the difference between primary care versus portal of entry. And it's an important distinction that chiropractors just get, muddied all the time. Portal of entry just means that the patient could come to see you without a referral. That's all it means, okay? It doesn't have anything to do necessarily with scope of practice or what your responsibility is, other than a referential type of diagnosis is your portal of entry, right? It's no different than a podiatrist or an optometrist. If somebody comes in to see the optometrist and, you tell them, well, I have atrial fibrillation, I want to see if optometry can help me. That's out of his scope, right? So he has an obligation to make the appropriate referral, so forth and so on. No different for chiropractors, okay? To contrast that with a primary healthcare provider. Primary healthcare provider is responsible for everything. I can't stress that enough. You are responsible for everything from soup to nuts, okay? And that's why nobody wants to be one. Because on top of the responsibility is that you're the least paid on the totem pole in terms of healthcare, okay? So you have all this responsibility, but the payout is minuscule, and it's even less for a chiropractor practicing in a primary care model. So you got to be out of your mind to want to do that. So really, we are portal of entry. We are specialists. Okay, that's what we should be promoting. That we're specialists in the location analysis, correction of vertical subluxation. Now, we still have the cultural authority issues and the marketing issues to overcome with that, because we think subluxations make people sick and kill them. And if you run around saying that, your state board will take your license away from you, right? Even though it's true, and you all know it's true, you just can't say it. So portal of entry, primary healthcare, alternative accrediting agency. Let me make sure that I talk about that. So there is another alternative. There is another accrediting agency, the International Agency for Chiropractic Evaluation. It's been in business for many years now. It has already accredited now, just recently, New Zealand College of Chiropractic. They were the first institution to get their full accreditation. The IACE has accredited other programs in different countries over the years. You can go to their website and look them up and find out more about that information if you want to. But at this point, they're, in the big leagues. They are accrediting chiropractic institutions. New Zealand College was the first. Australia's in the works. There's another international school. The name is escaping me right now. Whether or not they're applying. Sherman is in the pipeline. So there will be several schools accredited by this accrediting organization probably by the end of this year. Okay. And they are, they're seeking recognition by the Department of Education. But I don't think there'll be a Department of Education by the time they get there. So that'll probably be a moot point. Get involved locally. I always stress chiropractors to join their state association, attend their board meetings, and get on a committee. I am pretty militant about telling chiropractors to not just write a check and become a member of an organization. Yes, write the check, but number one, make sure you get involved so you know that the leadership of that organization that you're giving your money to is actually doing what they say they're doing. I've been involved in enough organizations in my lifetime to know that people don't always do what they say they're doing. So make sure that you get involved. Make sure you go to their board meetings. Make sure you get on a committee. Do something to help that organization. I'm probably preaching to the choir with this group, so won't spend much time on that. Disobey your local tyrant. Keep your eye on things. Attend your state board meetings. I know the New York Council is good about always having somebody attending these state board meetings. I would encourage you to always have more than one or two people attending these state board meetings. There's strength in numbers. And we need to show the people who are regulating us that we are paying attention to everything that they're doing. I've had some interesting experiences with the New York State Board and trying to get, FOIA requests and other things, all kinds of interesting shenanigans that I've had the opportunity to witness. And that's not unique to New York State. There's a lot of states that are like that. Freedom of information in some of these states, it's just a saying. It's not something that it's actually in practice. Attend your state board meetings, alternate with friends, report back to each other, right? We need to know what's going on the state board level. Get involved globally, join a national or international chiropractic trade association, such as the IFCO, ICA, ACA. I put the ACA there, and I put it there for a specific reason, because, not everybody that I talk to is always on board with other organizations. And my point with this is that, listen, if you believe that the ACA's agenda is the agenda, and that's what it should be, that's the direction we should move in, then you have a moral obligation to belong to that organization, support its values, and push its values, right? So the same is true for these other organizations. If you have this belief that, this profession is location analysis, correction, vertebral subluxation, do you belong to a national or international chiropractic association that is doing exactly that? We're trying to carry that message forward. So get involved globally as well as locally. Add to the evidence. I said research is a never-ending process. It's never settled. Donate money every year to a chiropractic research cause. There's plenty of them out there. I'm involved with one. And if you need some place to send money, send it to the Foundation for Vertebral Subluxation. But there's plenty of them out there. I would just make sure that they're actually doing chiropractic research. Okay? It's a lot of chiropractic research out there that doesn't use our unique terminology, and it's part of the problem why we are in the pickle we're in. because we've had, 30 years of supposed chiropractic researchers who are peppering the chiropractic literature with research that conflates our unique terminology. So they conflate spinal adjustment with spinal manipulation. They conflate vertebral subluxation with joint dysfunction or articular dysfunction and so forth, right? They don't mean the same thing, but they put in the literature that they mean the same thing, okay? And then so chiropractic gets equated with spinal manipulation. Chiropractic gets equated with articular dysfunction and joint dysfunction. Those things are not unique to chiropractic. We don't own spinal manipulation. I belong to this gym here in Georgia called Lifetime Fitness, big chain, high-end fitness clubs. And you walk up the stairs in Lifetime Fitness. I was there this morning, and the whole half of the top floor is sort of an open treatment area, I'll call it, because they have, all the treatment benches out there. They have a whole row of vibrating chairs, massage chairs. They have a whole row of massage tables that use water to massage you. And they have these tables that use cold. They have vibration plates. They have these trainers now that are trained in what they're calling dynamic stretching. And so, they'll have a client, you'll see them working with them, massaging them, doing trigger point work. They get, one of the guns and they go up and down their spine, pop, 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 right? They even put them in traction. I see all the time they have people laying there with the fulcrums, with their neck on it, with their head hanging over the back of the table. So they're doing things that chiropractors do every day in their office, right? And they didn't need 8 years of education. They didn't need $300,000 of student loan debt. They didn't have to pass part 4, all 4 parts of national boards, right? And they're in there thumping away on people, right? Firing off mechanoreceptors, sending all that stuff to the brain, lighting up the brain, right? And no chiropractic degree. So this is where we are in the chiropractic profession, right? And then you'll see ads for chiropractors advertising that stuff. Wait a second, I can go to Lifetime Fitness and get that as part of my membership, So donate money every year to a chiropractic cause, research cause. Just make sure they're actually doing chiropractic research. Okay. I mean, if you really want more research on spinal manipulation and back pain, then give your money to that. But I don't know of too many organizations that are doing real chiropractic research. Ignorance is not bliss. I don't have to tell you guys that. You're sitting here listening to me drone on at 9 o'clock on a Monday night. Read, continue your education, connect the dots, find the missing puzzle pieces. It never ends. Help students. I told you at the beginning, where my focus is these days. It's really all I care about. It's really all my focus is making sure that we stop this pillaging of the young people in our profession and taking advantage of them for our own use. Donate money every year to your alma mater or your adopted alma mater. If you have one, maybe your alma mater doesn't want you, or you don't want your alma mater, we'll find one, because there's a couple of good schools out there. I am not a proponent of writing a blank check to the general fund of any chiropractic college. I'm on the board of trustees at Sherman, and I do not donate to the general fund. I give my money directly to students through scholarships that I set up, either personally or through the foundation, because then I know exactly where my money's going, and I don't have to worry that I gave money to the school and then they went and gave it to the cartel or something else. I know my money's going directly to help a student and offset their tuition. Okay. And then obviously number 10 on the top 10 list, be heard, get involved in our country's politics. I've been talking a lot about the profession. but getting involved in our country's politics is also part of this, you know, so if you're involved locally with your politicians, try to get to Washington, D.C. and meet your politicians, your representatives, your elected representatives up in Washington too. You know, so that they get to know you, so that you're the go-to chiropractor when they have a question about chiropractic or they have a question about healthcare, so forth and so on, that they've got the voice of a, you know, solid subluxation focused chiropractor that's giving them advice about what chiropractic is and what chiropractic isn't. Is the one of the things I worry about with Kennedy getting in is who's going to have his ear. What faction of chiropractic is going to have his ear? Not that I think that he's going to do much for the chiropractic profession itself, but that's a whole nother topic. So that's the end of my talk. This is just a summary of it, everything I already talked about. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. We've all heard that before. By the way, this guy who's on fire here, that's Mohammed Bouazizi. He is the pushcart vendor that started the Arab Spring by setting himself on fire. So, you know, you think about whether or not one person can have an impact. Much of what you see going on in the world, and that includes Russia and Ukraine and all of that, is a result of this man right now. That started, you know, that's him setting himself on fire in Tunisia, and it catapulted into everything else that happened during the Arab Spring, all the way to stuff that's happening to this very day. So what we do as individuals definitely has an impact on people. So I thank you.
Matt, I want to thank you so much. This was a very, very eye-opening and a big reminder. It's one of the reasons I dedicated 16 years of my life to the council board. You know, we have a couple of Jeff Watkins, the fellowship in Pennsylvania. So there's a bunch of people doing stuff like this. You know, we had a young doc talk for our Band of Brothers a couple of months ago. She's a new doc, and she was talking about mentorship specifically because she said too many of the people in the profession, it goes back to eating our young, how much the practicing doctors are taking advantage of the kids that are coming out. So
Yeah.
it's you know, this is really good. Anybody else have a comment? Please unmute yourself. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, Matt, thank you for all the reminders and all the hard work you do and all the research that you pump out. It helps my practice. I read as much as I can. And the reminder that we got to stay involved. We got to get a little more political, step up our games. So thanks a lot for helping us out.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Matt. I'm one of your clients. I got the insurance through you, and I feel it's great that you guys really have your heart in the right place. That's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, Matt, I think it was even today, I was on the
Hey, Jeff.
Chiropractic Trust Facebook page and never heard it put this way before, but it made a lot of sense that they were saying how, you know, those other chiropractic factions within our profession, they're trying to get us to be as much like the medical profession as possible and the primary care type of doctor so that they can absorb us as went the way of osteopathy years ago. And that really made total sense. You know, there's not just chiropractors involved in what's happening in our profession to take it the wrong direction, but other powers that are seeking to do away with us because we are competition for them. And we've always known that, although we don't see it that way because we're not like them. We don't try to reproduce what they do. And boy, it just seems like there's just such a mountain that we're always climbing in this profession. And as you can see with a lot of us on here, we've been doing this a long time. And I went to Sherman when Sherman wasn't approved in New Jersey. And I went down there from New Jersey with my parents going, well, aren't you coming back to New Jersey? I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to be a chiropractor and I'll go where I go. and I'll land where I land. And I wound up in Pennsylvania. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, one of the big concerns when it comes to trying to get another accrediting agency active, which I know we certainly need, is to make sure that we still allow the students to have access to student loans. And that's always one of the big problems because they're always going to need money. And we need to make sure, what do we have to do to secure the student loan issue, that no matter what we do with another accrediting agency, that still remains intact for them to access?
Yeah, good question. So a couple of things on that. And setting aside for now the fact that the U.S. Department of Education is going away, things like student loans and things like that, or from what I understand, are probably just going to be moved under the Treasury Department through some division of the Treasury Department. So, you know, whatever they do with that is still going to be in play. But specifically to the issue of an accrediting agency and the tie for the school to student loan access, there's two issues. One is when the IAC gets recognition from the United States Department of Education, if it even needs it at that point, then that automatically makes any school recognized by them, accredited by them, eligible. The second piece of that is every single school in the United States is also accredited by a regional accreditor, which gives them Title IV funding access. Okay, so you don't need the CCE for student loan money. In fact, the only reason why we lost the battle before the Department of Education a few years ago, when the CCE was on the ropes and was in, you know, had 4,000 complaints against it, the most in the history of accreditation, and the United States Department of Education was thinking about removing, you know, their recognition. The only reason the ICA changed their mind and supported the CCE was because Life West did not have regional accreditation at the time, and Jerry was scared and afraid, or used that to scare chiropractors to support the CCE because they were afraid, well, Life West will lose, you know, their ability to get student loan money. The reality was at the time that Dr. Kent did a series of lectures on this to dispel those myths, and explained how actually it would have been to our benefit for that to happen, because then that would have forced all the states to change their CC only language right then and there. So, you know, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. So yes, it's a concern, but really in the context of everything that's happening is really not a concern, because they all have regional accreditation. And once the IACE is recognized, if that's necessary at the time, then that will confer the ability for student loan money.
Matt, I have a question with IACE, because I know Tony DeMarco, and he's on the board of the IACE, but remember SCAZA?
Yes.
You know, the way they were marginalized? How does IACE avoid becoming marginalized?
Well, one thing is the times are much different than they were when SCAZA was around. When SCAZA was in play, the United States Department of Education told the profession directly, we don't want two accrediting agencies. We only want one. And that's how the CCE ended up becoming recognized. Remember, there were the ACA schools and the ICA schools, and the ACA and the government said, we just want one accreditor. And the ACA and the ICA got together and decided they were going to work together. Well, the ACA went behind the ICA's back and went to the federal government without telling the ICA, got recognition, and you know the rest is history. And so then SCAZA had to do its thing. So the government already didn't want to deal with two accrediting agencies, and you know, that's why SCAZA ended up falling apart. The other reason SCAZA ended up falling apart was, and it's way too detailed and nuanced of a conversation for me to get into. Simon Senzon would be the perfect person to get into the details of this. But there were a lot of shenanigans that went on where information was being fed by the cartel to the government about SCAZA, blah, 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 that led to, that downfall. But there are still some states that have SCAZA language, and South Carolina is one of them. And don't quote me on this because I don't know the nuanced details of it, but my understanding is that the IAC is actually using the original corporation that SCAZA was established under. So this is really, a later iteration of that same organization. So it's kind of
Thanks
neat
for that.
in a lot of ways.
Anybody else have a question or comment? All righty. Tony, you want to say anything? Dave, Gary, Joanne, anybody?
Thank you for the information, bro. Good stuff.
Yep.
A lot of in-depth shit there, guys, Sit down and digest all that.
Matt, I
Yeah.
want to say thank you for your time, energy, and passion you always give to the profession. I have a million questions and comments about this presentation, and you and I could probably sit down for another hour and go to it, and hopefully one day we will.
Or more, right?
Absolutely.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Okay. Guys, thanks very much. Everybody have a great night. Matt,
Thanks,
thank you very
everybody.
much for coming on tonight. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
Matt.
the information.
Matt.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
brother.
Thanks, Matt.
Tremendous.
Anytime.
Thanks, Matt.